The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. A sad day here in Southern California. It looks like the season is probably over for my beloved Celtics, but we're going to try to gut our way through this podcast, much like Kevin Garnett tried to gut his way through Game 4. On the phone right now, on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline, from the sports reporters on ESPN, from the New York Daily News, and the host of a new show from 2 to 3 on 1050 a.m., ESPN New York, Mike Lupica. What's happening?
Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm sad. It's just, it's one thing to get beat, but it's another thing to throw the game away.
Well,
you know, when you haven't even played well and you still have a chance to steal it, and then you don't steal it. That's what kills me.
Here, what I always love to talk about is how fragile these games are and how the biggest moments in sports can turn on the smallest plays. And the example I always use is Game 4 of the 2004 Championship Series, where not only are the Yankees 3 outs away, but the guy they're bringing in to get those 3 outs is the greatest in the history of the planet Earth. And what happens? A walk, a stolen base, and a single up the middle. Okay,
Yep.
And nobody at that time knows that the Yankees are starting to fall down a hill, but they are. You know, Mark Johnson scores a goal at the end of the first period against the Russians, and all of a sudden it's 2-2, and they blow out one goalie and put in another, and history changes. What are we talking about today if Pierce does make that shot? What is LeBron reading and hearing about himself after dribbling the ball off his foot and giving the ball to the Celtics with 19 seconds? But that's how fragile they think. Pierce misses, they survive in overtime, and now the conversation is completely different about the Celtics and the Heat today.
Rondo misses the layup. That
oh, God, it was a kill.
In general, it was not a well-coached game on the Celtics side. I think Doc's done a good job with this team, but it became pretty clear as the second half wore on that Miami had figured out what Rondo could and couldn't do. And the Celtics were playing 4-on-5. He couldn't really cover anybody. He couldn't dribble with his left hand. He was afraid to shoot. It was clear that Delonte West should be playing point guard and that Jeff Green should have been in. I have no idea why they went small for more than a couple of minutes there.
I hate that. I hated that lineup last night. It's amazing. It's amazing how small the Celtics can look. Even when they don't go small, they look small sometimes.
Yeah,
and
no Perkins.
And it also shows you how we had wildly overevaluated the Knicks coming into this series, because I think we overvalued the Celtics coming out of the first round. But last night, you saw from the Heat, even on a night where they made their own mistakes coming down the stretch, that to me the biggest moment of the whole game, even bigger than Rondo missing the layup, and even was the three that LeBron made after Ray Allen's three. To me,
84-81.
Yeah, it just completely changed the whole dynamic of the game at that point, because not only are they not going to get a three there, they're not going to get any points at all. The Celtics are going to get the ball back, 84-81. And he steps back in front of the Celtics bench and makes that three. And if you're watching the game, and whether you're rooting for the Celtics or I've been, as I said to you, I wanted this series to go best of 13. I think it's the most compelling, fun thing that we've got left, even with what we saw in the second game last night. You had a feeling at that point that something bad was going to happen, and then when maybe the greatest scorer your team has ever had is waving at other guys when he's trying to set up the last shot, that's never a good sign.
No. It was ironic that a veteran team ended up falling apart because of a lack of execution. And also Garnett, you knew he wasn't going to have a great game because he was so good in Game 3, basically a day rest. I wasn't expecting a ton from him yesterday, but he looks so old. And as Barkley pointed out, once these old forwards start doing those pump fakes right next to the rim instead of just going up and dunking, it's one of the signs that you're coming to an end. When you're afraid of Joel Anthony, when you're 2 feet away from the rim.
Yeah, I was joking to my sons the other day. You can't stop Joel Anthony. You can only hope
Right.
to contain him. But when we were talking over the weekend on the telephone, I think we were saying, okay, yeah, they got a game, but can Garnett summon up that kind of effort 3 more times? And the effort was certainly there last night, but the legs weren't. And here's the other thing about that last play. And I said this at the Final Four. I say this all the time. I said it about Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson wasn't nearly as much of a genius when the shots stopped falling for his team and started falling for the Mavericks, okay?
Yeah.
I think Brad Stevens, the Butler coach, is one of the shining young talents in all of coaching, right? How did he do when his team couldn't buy a basket against UConn at the end?
Yep.
Doc pushed all the right buttons against the Knicks, but the Celtics made those shots, and I don't know what he thought was going to happen on that last play last night. I've read the explanation that Allen was going to do this, and then he and Garnett, if I've got 19 seconds, I got to get a better shot than that.
Well, I think they were really afraid to give Miami the ball back. And the Celtics have done that before, where Pierce is just going to wind the clock down and wind it down, and he's going to get the last shot of the game. It's usually a little fall away where he goes to the left. But, yeah, to have the play get screwed up was pretty weird. I came out of that game, I respected Miami more, and yet I thought less of them at the same time. I thought LeBron and Wade, they played so freaking hard in that game. And it was really a two-man team. Bosh had the most deceiving 2011, I think, that's ever happened.
Ringo.
It's really like, who else did they have? They went 2 against 5. And for the Celtics, it's a little hard for me to accept that we couldn't beat a team at home that really only had 2 guys playing well. But then you look at the Miami side, nothing from Miller, nothing from Haslem, nothing from Ilgauskas. You go down the line, I don't know if they can win the title with just 2 guys.
Well, I was just going to ask you this question, because right now, if you asked me who do I think is going to win the NBA championship, I would give the slight nod to them. But before I left to come into town today to do the show, I started writing down all those names that you just mentioned, and James Jones, and Mike Bibby, and I took LeBron and Wade out of the conversation and Bosh, and then I wrote down all those other names. I said, they could be champions in a month. All those guys, all these scrubs that they run out there, but what they got, even though Bosh, to me, his only big moment was the tip-in. That was a huge play. And
how did that happen? Because the Celtics screwed up.
Because Garnett's out. Yeah, Garnett's out top.
And Pierce had Bosh, and the Celtics had a small lineup anyway. And Bosh, to his credit, went right to the rim and tried to tip in whatever was going to be there. But he was the tallest guy around the rim by 5 inches.
Here's what I came away from last night thinking about the Heat. Take the Celtics out of the conversation for a second. This team that we've seen from them in the playoffs. This is the team that had Jeff Van Gundy saying before the year that they'd never lose 3 in a row or 2 in a row, whatever the heck it was. Okay,
yep.
This was the team he thought was going to win 70 games. What I took away from this game is 2 things. One, the 3-man game that they got, and I'll throw Bosh in for the sake of the point I'm trying to make.
That's nice of you, diplomatic.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, he did it 20 and 11. I can't completely. It wasn't like an Alex English 20 and 11.
Right, okay.
It wasn't. There was a numbers hanging element to it. I will absolutely concede that too. But 83 points out of those 3 guys. Those were the sort of 3-man games you got out of great teams in the 1980s in Boston and L.A. Okay,
yeah.
Whether it was Worthy and Magic and Kareem or Bird, Mikhail Parrish, they can win the championship doing this. And the other thing is they do play more defense than I ever thought they were going to play.
Yeah.
I got to give them that. When they needed stops last night, they got some awfully big stops. And even though the Celtics can make you think sometimes, Bill, that they're never going to get another good look at the basket, right. I got to give props to the Miami defense.
I'm surprised that they could expend that much energy on defense and still have something left for offense. And that's been, to me, the most shocking thing about what Miami is doing is because they really don't have a good team. And it's really those 2 guys carrying everybody. And the fact that those guys can go that hard on both ends, it's really Jordan-esque. And I didn't think either of those guys had that gear, especially Wade. I thought his body was going to break down. I think that's the irony of this series, is that the Celtics were the team that had the injury. You would think that with all the minutes that Miami, that those three guys were logging and the responsibility they had, you would assume that one of those three guys would get injured. Instead, it's Rondo, who is the youngest, most spry, healthiest guy in this series, and that's the guy who goes down. I still think that if Rondo doesn't get hurt, it's 2-2 going back to Miami. I mean, he's basically playing with one arm, and they almost won the game anyway.
When you look at Miami right now, at this point in the season, going forward, and we're going to assume that the Celtics cannot win 3 in a row. Okay, so they play probably Chicago, but that's become a goofy series to me. I never thought that Atlanta would go toe-to-toe to them, even like this. Is it Wade's team or is it LeBron's team? Whose team is it?
Well, I think that was the question. That was what I've been writing about all year, and I always thought somebody had to be the alpha dog. I've been amazed that these guys have been able to basically pass the bong back and forth, depending on, who's feeling it. Oh, you want it? Okay. And yesterday LeBron was feeling it, and Wade just kind of deferred. But when they needed Wade, he would make a shot too. I never thought they would find that balance.
They have figured it out to an extent that I don't believe Carmelo and Amari may ever figure it out here. And I know it's a small sampling here, but see the one thing about LeBron that I've always been pretty consistent about, even when he was acting like a knothead with the decision and all of the decisions that brought him to the decision. Okay, I've always thought that his basketball values are pretty solid. That he has pretty impeccable basketball values, and to me, they were on display last night. I can't believe he's not a better mid-range jump shooter, and I believe that some summer he could go off and come back with one the way Magic went back to East Lansing that summer and came back with an outside shot. But I've never questioned his desire to win, and I know everybody's always just going for easy rings. Well, it turned out that it wasn't that easy.
No.
But I think he's a ball player. I think at his core, he's a ball player who wants to win. And coming off a game where he was totally invisible in Game 3, that you could go like 10 minutes in real time in that game and not even hear his name mentioned the other night, he did come back pretty big last night.
You know what else I thought about last night? Just thinking about how bad the 3 through 12 guys have been playing on Miami. If Miami wins a title this year with that supporting cast, then I guess the decade's over, because they're only going to build better players around these guys, and they always have the move where they could trade Bosch for 3 pieces, or they could just keep signing free agents or whatever, but they're going to win it in a really, really, really competitive NBA season. If they're going to win the title just with these 2 guys, then we might as well write the decade off.
Yeah, you look at them, and now, even more than ever, you say, boy, if Pat hadn't gotten giddy and added Bosch to the equation and had added 2 role-playing pieces there, I'm not sure anybody could beat them.
You blame Pat for that? See, I feel like Bosch, Wade, and LeBron, that was a done deal 2 years ago, and that's...
So you think he had no choice, that they were all coming? If one's not in, they're all not in.
If Wade and LeBron were really about winning titles, then the 2 of them just go to Chicago, and they play with Dang and Noah and Rose, and then it's over, and they win 75 games a year. So I think that was done a couple years ago. But, yeah, it's going to be pretty frightening. And for me, I hold on to this philosophy that you shouldn't be able to win with just 2 guys, and that it should be a team game. Dallas has been the team. I didn't expect it, but Dallas has been the team that's shown the best chemistry, the best 1 through 9, the best teamwork, all that stuff. And if it turns out to be Miami and Dallas, which seems like where we're headed, then that's basically my whole theory on display in the finals.
Hey, it's funny. Before the 2001 World Series, I wrote a column saying, well, it takes more than 2 pitchers to beat the New York Yankees. Well, actually, yeah. that's exactly all it took. But Chris Lupica, my oldest boy, who's a Bill Simmons-like NBA wonk, okay? He said to me, after the Mavericks had just won 1 game in this series, he said, Dad, it's lucky the Lakers never had to play them in this run because, and he was saying this is a horses for courses thing. The matchups are bad. Yeah. And I mean, now, I'm not saying that anybody would ever think that they could sweep these guys. I put that sweep up. I mean, everybody now says, oh, yes, we could see all this. Well, yeah, okay. There's 3 stunning results now, and you can fill in because you follow it more closely than I. Rick Barry's Warriors beating Washington that time and sweeping it. Okay, the Pistons beating Kobe and Shaq in 5 in what was really a sweep, because if Kobe doesn't make one shot, it's a sweep.
Right.
And this thing the other day, this was one of the most stunning playoff results I've ever seen. But when you saw it unfold, you say, yeah, that makes sense, because once you make Gasol come out and start chasing Dirk around on the perimeter, all of a sudden the Lakers don't look like the Lakers anymore.
I'd throw in one more. There's another great. I like where you're going, and there's one more great one. The '86 Rockets over the Lakers.
Oh yeah.
Because that was a sweep too. I think they lost the first one. They won the next 4, and that was another one of those series where as you watch more and more of it, you started saying to yourself, "Ooh, the matchups are just bad."
Yeah.
This is no accident. By Game 4, it was no longer an accident. Hakeem was just destroying them. Yeah, you never know until it's a little bit like boxing.
And Tyson Chandler, is a big, whatever he contributes statistically, he's a big part of the problems that Dallas created for those guys. And and here's the other thing. I don't know what you think about this, but it's again, I'm looking at this I'm sitting in New York City asking you this question. You see what happens in the modern NBA when you've got an aging point guard who can't cover, okay? And we saw that in Up in Lights with Derek Fisher against the Mavericks.
Yep.
And the Knicks just went all in because they think there's not many good options out there. And they may be right with Chauncey Billups, who doesn't cover anybody and never really did cover anybody. And so you can talk about leadership and decision-making and the ability to make a big shot, and you could be describing either one of those guys, Derek Fisher or Chauncey Billups. But boy, oh boy, in this modern game, you imagine what this Heat Celtics series would have looked like if Rondo's 100% for the last 5 quarters.
And he was playing so well too. Going back to what you said about the Billups, I think everybody missed why they did that. I think they just signed him because now that he's an expiring contract, they could trade next year. I don't think they have any feeling that he's like a piece that moving forward. I think it's, we have a 5% chance of Dwight Howard. We need a big contract just in case.
And the funny thing about this, first there was the citywide obsession with LeBron, which gave way to the citywide obsession with Carmelo, which will now give way to the citywide obsession with getting Chris Paul somehow. Okay.
Or Dwight Howard, or whoever.
Howard, or whoever, whoever the guy is. I mean, Mark Gasol, who's clearly won the best in Gasol category in the NBA playoffs. There'll be something, but it's interesting that all of heaven and earth was moved to get Melo here. And next year may still turn out to be another transitional year for the Knicks.
I think we've had 4 now, as they've the 2 to prepare for the LeBron sweepstakes last year, and now this year. Just keep looking forward to some free agent boon.
Yeah, Bill, in New York, we never actually address the season being played by the Knicks. We're always talking about one that's going to be played down the road. And then, after the season was over, I said, okay, this was the classic Bill Parcells line. You are what your record says you are, okay? Yeah. They were 2 games over 500 when before they got Carmelo. They were 500 after they got Carmelo, and then they got swept by the Boston Celtics. That's who they were.
Yeah. Looking at this Dallas-Miami series, Miami, America seems like just in general they're ready for Miami to lose. It shouldn't be this easy. It represents a lot of things that we don't like about sports, this combination of the 2 superpowers, all that stuff. Dallas, don't you feel like Dallas could be America's darling here? Nowitzki suffered for a while. Kids never won a title. Mark Cuban, I think people are attached to. Barea has become the most popular midget since Vern Troyer. He's running around, zipping around. It seems like that. This has America's team potential, or am I crazy?
All right. Here, I spent a fair amount of my first show talking about this yesterday.
Okay.
You can never assume that there's going to be justice in sports, okay? Sometimes there is, Sometimes the gods owe you one, and you get one. But sometimes you never get one. If anybody's owed a championship, the Dallas Mavericks are owed one, and they're especially owed one against the Miami Heat. Because they're, in my lifetime watching the NBA, and again, you're more of you have a deeper historical knowledge of the game than I do, but I love the sport, okay? There have been 2 championship-altering calls that I've seen. One was Hugh Evans against Bill Laimbeer against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on a Pistons team that was going to win Game 6 and going to get a three-peat, okay?
Yep.
Just a totally phantom call. And the other one is the phantom call by Bennett Salvatore that sends Dwayne Wade to the line on a night, a bailout call when the Mavericks are going to go up 3-0. If they go up 3-0, then he'd have no chance to win that championship. And, again, the Mavericks went down and stayed down after that, okay? They never recovered from it.
Yeah, they did. They deserved a little of what they got. But
they
you're right.
did, but it's the law of unintended consequences, okay? The Mavericks, they're owed one by the basketball gods, and I would love to. I think it'd be great for the sport to have them win. I think Dirk is, he's what Mickelson used to be, the greatest player without a major.
I am shocked that Cuban has kept such a low profile during this whole run. It's almost like he thinks they can win and he doesn't want to jinx it, so he's just staying out of the way. He hasn't given one interview. No,
you would think that he would be on his way to Donald Trumpville by now. Yeah, we are winners and you are losers.
Yeah.
But he was. I thought he was pretty. Just his body language, I thought was pretty gracious on Sunday. And, And this may be a East Coast bias. It may be a New England kid bias, but I have to admit there haven't been many beatdowns that I enjoyed more than Sunday. If they'd won by 60 points, I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, I 95% enjoyed it, and then the 5% of me that's an NBA fan, that it just having Phil Jackson go out that way didn't feel good. But then I remembered he's going to be the New York Knicks coach in 2012, and I felt fine with it.
This is something that I have been thinking about since the non-answer on Sunday. I'm sure you saw it too. My hopes and aspirations are that who even talks like that? Who even thinks like that? It's, yes, I'm retiring, or no, I'm not retiring. And even if he said he was retiring, I'm not sure I would believe he was retiring, okay?
Yeah.
He's 65 years old. He is younger than Jim Leland, who is still managing beautifully the Detroit Tigers, okay? He is 1 year older than Tom Coughlin. Joe Torre managed until he was 70. In the modern world, 65 is not old. I mean, there was a time when Mr. Auerbach, stopped coaching long before that. I don't believe Phil Jackson is automatic. Do you think he's done?
I think there's some real physical issues with him, and that's what he needs to figure out, because he's had the
hip, the heart. I know, yeah.
Well, he needs to have both of his knees replaced too. And if you've ever, I had lunch with him once, and he was just so uncomfortable sitting in the seat that it made me think, like, this is not about I'm mentally burned out, any of that. I think physically the grind of traveling, sitting on those chairs where you're cramped with the three assistant coaches. I think that's the stuff that's killing him. Standing up at practice, walking around. So I think he's going to take a year off. I think he's going to refuel. But from everything we know about this guy, are there three people who care about the Knicks more than him? And the ties that he had with Holtzman.
No, that's the thing.
The ties he had with Bradley and those teams. Like, isn't that the logical last chapter for him?
Well, that's what I think, because I kind of laughed. I kind of laughed when he was talking about all those young coaches coming up right now. Like Phil has ever had a passion for mentoring, Or
like he cares, he cares
Bill,
for the day.
Bill, let's, I mean, you look at like Larry Brown's coaching tree that goes everywhere, all over the planet, back through time, okay? Phil doesn't exactly have that, but the only coach he ever cared about, really, head coach, I'm not talking about Tex Winter, who he obviously has a deep and profound love for, was Red. And you can make this case. The Knicks are not going to do anything with D'Antoni with a lockout looming and still owning him, whatever it is, $6 million. Okay, so Mike D'Antoni's going to be the Knicks coach next year. And then there's going to be a lot of stuff that can happen after that year. Doc Rivers is probably going to be in play. Phil Jackson's going to be in play. I'm not saying conclusively that I have some inside track on Phil Jackson that he's going to coach again, but that was a non-denial the other day. After the worst loss of his life.
And it's the logical last chapter. It really is. And, one of the things he told me was that he still talks to Bradley all the time. And Bradley actually watches the NBA. Like, he's a big fan, and he'll call Phil or he'll email him with what happened there, what's up with Kobe. Like, it just seems like, let's say he takes over the Knicks, and now it would have been almost 40 years since the last title when he becomes the coach. So they won in 73. he'd be taking over for the 2012-2013 season. So literally the 40th anniversary. And all these guys are still alive except for Holtzman and DeBusschere. Why wouldn't that be the last chapter?
It's always made perfect sense to me, and that is why, again, this was it was fun. This has been a fun week to start a radio show. I talked about that yesterday. I said, first of all, he's not too old, and second of all, it's what I call the Michael Jordan competitive narcotic. Okay, whatever they say. And here's the other thing: when you talk about having his knees replaced, it's a bear to have it done. I'm not saying I know anything about it, but I have friends who have had it done. And once you do have it done, the quality of your life begins to improve, exponentially as soon as you're through your rehab.
Right. Well, with the Knicks fans, they hold these grudges for coaches and players.
See, I hadn't picked up on that.
Well, how would the Knicks fans respond to him coming back? Because he was responsible for a lot of bad memories. Okay.
Total, complete love. I think that they would be able to say, to even though, I often laughingly, when you hear the crowd start saying, this ref sucks or something, I'll always turn to somebody at the press table and say, yes, we're the most sophisticated fans in the world.
Right.
Yes, here I am again in basketball Mecca. But
right.
I think they'll be able to take a step back and look at the big picture. And the big picture is he gives them their best chance to win again before they turn into the New York Rangers with people chanting 1940 at them. Okay.
Right.
And not blame him because Charles Smith couldn't get the ball to the iron that night at the 8th Avenue end of the Garden.
Let's switch gears for a second because I wanted to ask you about the Yankees. The stadium, what is it, the third year with the stadium?
Yes.
And I was talking to a friend of mine who is a Yankee fan who just said that it's absolutely, completely, totally changed the dynamic of following and rooting for that team if you live in New York, that nobody has any real desire to go to that stadium. It doesn't feel special. And it's like a little bit of a malaise over this team now. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree. I think it is a constant sort of mirthful thing to see those empty seats close to the field. And they're occasionally filled for big occasions. The feeling that you got, I always talk about this, I loved it on the other side of 161st Street. That place was Scott Brocious had the best line. He had a line that I wish I'd written one night when he had a big double in the playoffs against the Oakland A's. And he said he got to second base and he could feel the ground shaking under his feet. Okay? And this place gets loud and they have put a World Series in there. Derek Jeter is very rarely wrong about Yankee tradition, but when he said the ghosts were going to move across the street, I don't believe they have to the extent. The first day I ever walked down the runway and through the dugout, and I did say, okay, this is a glitzier Yankee Stadium, but I felt like I was in Yankee Stadium. The atmosphere is completely different. It's not Fenway Park. It's not Wrigley Field. It's not. There's more history and a lot less World Series at Fenway Park than there is going to this, what I call Palace of Versailles Stadium on the north side of 161st Street.
Fenway was able to reinvent itself and reinvent the area around it and do some cosmetic stuff that was able to get them.
They've done everything
revenue.
they can. You're absolutely right. They've done.
Why didn't the Steinbrenners do that with Yankee Stadium?
Because luxury suites. Because they were fixed on the luxury suites, and they were fixed on having the biggest. It's the same thing that went into Jerry Jones's place in this monstrosity. Have you been there, by the way? I'm switching. I have the attention span of a hummingbird.
I'm a defender. I'm a defender of the football stadium because
I don't have any problem with it.
8-10 times a year.
But here's my only problem. And my son, my youngest son, is a huge Zach is a huge Packers fan, and he I promised him that they made the Super Bowl, so he went with me there.
Yeah.
And he said, Dad, you can't not watch the game on the screen. It's like your eyes are like, it's like if you try to watch the field, you almost feel like somebody's behind you saying, no, look up there, because it's a better view of the game.
Isn't that where we're headed, though? Like my little son is 3.5 and can use the iPad better than I can.
Yeah, no. Listen, believe me, I'm already there. Anytime anything goes wrong, computer-wise or technology-wise, it's another reason why I'm sad that my youngest son has gone to college, because in the past, I would just say, Zach, could you get down here for 1 second and fix whatever the thing is that needs to be fixed?
I do think the new stadiums, everybody talks about state of the art, and you forget that state of the art has a shelf life, and then it's the next wave of state of the art. The next state of the art, I think, is going to be stadiums designed for people to do multiple things at once. The games will be just part of everything else that's going on. And it's going to be really weird, and there will be a distracted kind of atmosphere, but that's just where it's going to go, and especially in baseball.
But where would you rather be? Would you rather be looking at the big screen down there at Jerry's Palace, or sitting next to the dugout at Fenway Park?
Wow, that's no contest. But I've been to, I think, 6 of the new quote-unquote state-of-the-art NFL stadiums.
Right.
And Dallas was my favorite.
Have you been to the what I call the Great Big Gray Bowl in New Jersey yet?
The Meadowlands, yeah. It was beautiful, a little bit like Yankee Stadium, actually. Beautiful palace, sterile.
Yeah, it's my friend Ralph Vacchiano from the Daily News. That's what he nicknamed it, the Big Ugly Gray Bowl.
It's just, I don't know. I think they're going to look back at the way they built some of these stadiums and realize that, people don't want to sit in the third deck where it takes them 40 minutes to walk up there when they can be at home with their 60-inch TV watching 5 games at once.
Well, that's you touch on something that I think about all the time. I have such admiration for the fans who go and sit in the seats. When you see how hard it is to get to these games, forget about getting to your seats once you get to the games, but the traffic they have to sit through. That you turn a trip to an NFL game. If you're a Giants fan, for example, it's an 8 or 9 hour process. And when I see those people sitting out there in December, I'm telling you, I say, wow, they love this more than I ever could, because they do this 8 or 10 times a year, and they do it like it's the normal course of things.
But what's interesting is the teams are actively working against them enjoying that whole experience. Like, they reduced the number of hours you can tailgate now. The parking is more expensive. The tickets are crazy expensive. They make you buy the preseason. It's almost like they keep upping the stakes for you to just say, you know what, screw you, I'm not going to go. I have friends from Boston that, have had Pats season tickets since, I think, 91.
That's the worst. It's the worst.
And they have to do this whole drive down Route 1, and only if you have good seats with a special pass does it not take like an hour and a half. They can only tailgate for, I think, 2.5 or 3 hours before the game because it's a quote-unquote family atmosphere. It's like, at some point, why do you want to even go?
No, I drove up for the Monday night game between the ones where the Patriots crushed the Jets. And I'm breezing along. I drive up from my home in Connecticut, and then I get there, and it took longer to get down Route 1 than it had taken me to get from Connecticut to Route 1. And I walked in, I said to Bob Ryan, I am never coming back here. And then, of course, they played in the playoffs, and I had to eat those words. But they kept saying, oh, it's not nearly as bad for a day game. And that actually turned out to be true.
Right. Let me ask you about the mid-'70s. Your first job was at the Globe.
Yeah.
You're covering the Celtics. What year was that, 75?
No. My first, now I'm going to try to tell you this as quickly as I can, because when my children were little and I couldn't get them to sleep, my wife would say, why don't you tell them the story of your career again, honey? Because that always works better than if you slipped them some Jack Daniels or something,
right.
Okay? I was working nights at the Globe while I was at Boston College, and I started writing for the Globe in my senior year of college. And they actually offered me the job of covering the Patriots while I was still in college, and I just kind of wanted to have my senior year. And then, so I was in the Ryan, Gammons, Montville, Ray Fitzgerald.
Right.
Those were my guys, okay? And all I ever wanted to do was work there, and then stuff got messed up. I moved to New York after Tiant won Game 1 of the 1975 World Series. I moved to New York literally the next day. And I had been hired by the old New York Post, Dorothy Schiff's New York Post, the Merchant Hamill, that one. And I didn't know anything other than I had been hired to come to New York, which was tremendous. I was 23 years old, and I had been writing for the Boston Phoenix and the Boston Globe. Okay?
That's what it was, okay.
Yeah, I was writing for the Boston Phoenix. And I wrote 4 features the first week. And I came in at the end of the week, and I looked at my schedule for the next week, and it was Knicks, sidebar, Knicks game, and the Knicks were starting this season. And there was this wonderful old Damon Runyon character named Ike Gellis, who was the sports editor of the Post, and who spent a lot of his day talking to his bookie. Okay, and so I meekly go back to his office at the back of the New York Post sports department on South Street. I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Gellis," and he puts his hand over his phone. He goes, "What?" And I said, I couldn't help but notice that I'm covering the Knicks next week, and they're starting their season. He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Mr. Gellis, I thought Lenny Lewin covered the Knicks." And he said, "Not anymore." And he goes, "Okay, now I want the Phillies and 6." And that's how I found out that I had been hired to have this beat in New York City without anybody ever having a conversation with me. So apparently I didn't screw up badly enough in those first 4 features to blow my entire career.
And that was the Spencer Haywood. Was that Spencer Haywood's first year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a second for another story? Are you okay?
Sure.
Okay. The second game of the season, the Knicks go down to New Orleans to play the Jazz. Okay. And Red did something during the game. And believe me, I'm like this child, this ball boy who's now covering the team. But he doesn't know anything about me. And I second-guessed him wildly on the back page of the Post. So apparently the habits, of a lifetime were forming already. Okay.
Yeah.
The next night, we have a game at the Garden, and they play the Celtics, and we crowd into Red's office after the game, and Ryan, I think, asked him some innocent question about the game, and Red starts to answer it, and then he smiles and he turns to me and he says, "Why don't you handle that one, Mike? You've been around this game a long time."
Ooh.
But you know what? From that moment on, I loved the old man. So watching him coach a basketball, Bill, watching him every night, and I was like 3 seats down from him, manage a game and manage what was just a 500. John Gianelli was on that team, Mo Layton, Neil Walk.
Yeah.
I can still, I believe, call timeouts with the best of them watching a game, and it was all from watching the old man coach basketball.
And that was like, I call it the Scotch and Sirloin era, because John Powers, who wrote for the Globe in the mid-'70s, wrote this book about covering the Celtics called The Short Season, which is a really good book. And it's just the kind of book that wouldn't exist now, because every night it's like, so then that night when I went out with Havlicek and Cowens to the Scotch and Sirloin, and that's what the reporters did, and there was only 3 or 4 of you covering the games.
And in those days, the Knicks were one of the first teams to charter if they were on the road and had to get back. So I'm 23 years old, and I'm sitting in the back of a team plane talking about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance with Phil Jackson, or talking about this with Bill Bradley. It was, you can only imagine, it was like going to the coolest grad school for basketball that you could. Oh no, that was one of the great years of my life.
And I was going to say, and cocaine with Spencer Haywood, but maybe you didn't have that conversation.
No, they were. It was such an up and down, and I think they were. If you could look this up, I think they were 40 and 42, or 42 and 40. But the old man just coached his butt off every night. One night we're in Cleveland, and they were losing 30. And that was that Cleveland team that was good, the Dick Snot, that team that used to go up against the Buffalo Braves. And Red he called a timeout, and he made a substitution, and finally they end up losing by 8. And I go into his office after the game in Richfield, Ohio, and I said, "Red, nobody's going to care about this except me tomorrow, but you just coached your ass off tonight." And he took a puff on his cigar, and he looked at me and he said, "Mike, let me ask you a question. Where was I going to go?" I said, well, he says, "My contract stipulates that unless I get thrown out, I have to stay till the end of the game, so I might as well coach."
Oof. What do you think was the tipping point when players and coaches, when that wall started to go up? Late 80s, around Jordan?
I don't know when the line of demarcation. All of a sudden, there was a point, where just as a newspaper man, where it was I didn't have anything that they wanted anymore. I don't know if it was the rise of television, but, Greg Nettles once joked famously about Reggie Jackson that if you were walking by his locker and you were going to pass it, he'd trip you to get your attention, okay?
Right.
That stopped, and I just think that the only reality after a while became television. Now it's been taken to another level by Twitter and social networks and where we get Reggie Bush's innermost thoughts about the strike, and I don't know, what is Twitter tweet version of putting your foot in your mouth? Is it putting your keyboard in your mouth? I mean, I don't know. Your cell phone in your mouth, but
I don't know.
But there came a point where newspaper people were a threat, and they wanted. And maybe I don't know if this makes any sense to you, where they just wanted to take their message directly to the camera, so it would be unfiltered.
I wrote about this a couple years ago with LeBron James because I think he was the first real big child of this whole era where he kind of learned from how everybody else did it. And he's one of those guys who controlled every interaction that any media member ever had with him. And it got to the point where you didn't even know who the person was because everything we had with him, there's always other people around, or it was an environment that he had picked. And it was like, who is this guy? And we just don't know. And I guess there's no way to know. And I even after the decision and all that stuff, I still don't feel like I have a handle on him. I think he's the first guy like that.
Well, here's what the example that I have now used since is, and it's different from LeBron, is Tiger, okay? Because in the end, we knew. I think most people are smart enough to know that we only know these guys as they want us to know them. It's the Tiger they want me to know. Michael was a little different because Michael was pretty much as you expected. You know, Michael wasn't trying to win any friends, okay? Michael was the main event of my lifetime in sports. I compare everybody else to Michael. But Tiger was, to me, a great watershed moment because even I, after caring about this my whole life, and it's, everything I've been able to do in my life is my love of sports and ability to write about it to some level. I knew even less about him than I thought I knew.
Yeah. But even he slipped up that, as when he was young and he did the GQ thing where he told the jokes.
To Charlie Pierce, yeah.
And that was it. He closed down after that.
But we had this image of this guy as the greatest winner. Winning, and it turned out to be, he's trying to score waitresses in the Perkins parking lot.
Tell me when you guys started the Sports Reporters, did you see this whole era of talking head shows?
I did not. I can remember,
coming?
Bill, yeah. I can remember in the 80s, before it became its current incarnation of the Sports Reporters, we used to go and tape like 2 at a time at Channel 5 on 67th Street in New York City. And I can remember what a big deal it was the first time the Sports Reporters ever actually showed up in the TV guide. And it was being aired like on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoon. It was like crazy. And then my buddy Joe Valerio, who I once wrote with at the New York Post, took over as producer. And then the game changer was the late, great Dick Schaap.
Right.
Dick Schaap, I guess everybody's on pins and needles at ESPN about this oral history book, that's coming out with Tom Shales and Jim Miller. And they talk to us, they kind of talk to us about what you're asking about, because that we were on the forefront of something. But to me, in the great context of ESPN and in the smaller context of our show, Dick Schaap was the game changer. He brought such credibility to our show. And he brought such weight to the whole network with his presence there. And to me, I never thought of it as any kind of groundbreaking thing, because there were other talking head shows. But when you had someone like Schaap elevating your game, and then, Bob Ryan I'd known since I was in college, and when he sat down, we just continued a conversation that we've been having since the Iron Horse Tavern across from the old Garden, and something about it worked. I mean, the fact that we've been on 20 years and in the Sunday morning rotation at ESPN, is pretty amazing, and somehow people have always felt as if they're part of the conversation.
How has that changed? Now it's 2011. Things get digested immediately, instantaneously. With the way your show worked in the past, you'd have a little bit of a say. And now it's like if something happens on Friday, by Friday night it's been digested and spat out.
Oh, yeah.
How have you dealt with that?
Oh, for real. Hey, listen, our favorite event is still a Saturday night game that ends late, okay?
Right.
And you can't end it late enough to suit me, because then we still got a chance to be the first word on something.
Or I would say the fourth round of a golf major would be good, right? Like setting up what's going to happen.
Yeah,
that day.
no. I always enjoy because I've been playing golf my whole life, and I'm a pretty good golfer. And Joe knows that, if something big is happening in golf, I do. I feel about golf a little bit the way you feel about the NBA. I've really followed it quite passionately. But so last Saturday night, for example, it wasn't late when the Celtics and the Heat ended up. But that to me, and when we were kicking it around after the game, and Joe said, should we start with the Lakers or should we start with the Heat and the? And I said, no. We start with the thing that just happened. So yes, Steve Young once said to me that he considered us like, this is several years ago, and it has changed. He said, we think of you as the last word. We read everything, we listen to everything all week, and then we tune in on Sunday to see what you guys say. And I still think there's an element of that to what we do. And, we were very lucky to get John Saunders after Dick passed away because he's just one of the best guys ever.
I was going to say, it must have been really hard to do the show the first few weeks after Dick left.
Well, here's what happened.
He was so essential to it.
Here's what happened. He went in to have his second hip replaced. Do you know the story?
Yeah. Well,
he went in to have his second hip replaced, and it was right after 9/11. And something went horribly wrong. A piece of bone got dislodged, or post-op infection. He was in intensive care from the first week, so we knew how dire his situation was.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like John was being brought in and saying, "Oh, you will now replace the great Dick Schaap." He almost had 3 months of with nobody knowing. People keep saying, "Oh, how's Dick?" Well, we knew Dick was probably never going to come out of the hospital. And so by the time Dick passed in December, John was, I always tell him, he's like Sidney Poitier in To Sir with Love, this elegant figure who just wandered into the bad kids at the back of the class. Yeah. But he fit right in. And so that transition was made smoother because we had those months to get to know each other. But he sat down, Bill, he sat down the first Sunday and he sort of got the whole rhythm of the thing. And so, I'd be in a foxhole with him any day of the week.
What was it about Dick Schaap? Because you rarely hear about these guys who just seem to have like a 100% approval rating. There's only a few of them. And everybody who crossed paths with Dick Schaap just still swear by the guy. He's passed away, 8, 9 years ago?
No, it'll be 10 years this December 22nd.
What was it about him that made him so special?
Well, first of all, he was a great writer. Okay, remember there was once a page at the Daily News at the old Herald Tribune where he was alternating with Jimmy Breslin. He and Breslin were best friends, and there's a quality about Dick that sometimes you go on television and be nothing like what you are. Breslin had the greatest line about Schaap. He said Schaap was a friend behind your back, and somehow that shined through with Dick Schaap. He was also the quickest conversationalist I have ever been around. We used to do the show in New York City for years and years. And I'd be about halfway home to Connecticut, and I think, oh, man, I should have said that, when Ryan said that.
Yeah.
Dick always said it in the moment. And the other thing, Bill, that was unbelievable about Dick Schaap, because he was the smartest and the funniest guy. Every Sunday he sat there, okay? He allowed us to look good. And he particularly allowed me to look good. We used to have a funny thing that I would do. I'd say something horrible about somebody, Yeah. And then a week later, I'd say, I'd turn to Schaap on the show and I'd say, Dick, with everybody talking at once, who can remember who said what? But there were some unfortunate comments made about so-and-so last week. And Schaap would always say, no, I remember clearly. It was you who said it, and he was... He was such a great guy. We were at a party one time, and somebody came over from sports. I can't remember who it was, and Dick was real nice to him. And the guy walked away, and as soon as he was out of earshot, I said, Dick, you hate him. Why were you so nice to him? And he poked a finger at me. He said, Michael, remember one thing. Nobody fakes sincerity better than I do.
Wow.
Oh, no, I miss him every day when I sit down. Every Sunday when I sit down there, I miss him. It was I sat with him more than anybody, 40 weeks a year, and it was a privilege every single time.
What made you want to do this radio show?
My wife, who's a lot smarter than I am, I had done it. I've been jokingly telling people I'm returning to radio after a much-needed 18-year sabbatical. And the first time around I did it, I didn't like commuting down to the city every day and then having to go write a column. She said, if you're going to do this again, if you think this might be fun, do it now. And right now it's only 1 hour a day. Once we get it up and running, I will come into the city 2 days a week and then do it from this little writing cottage office I have at home. And it just seems, I don't know, I mean, you tell me, it just seems like I'm more in step with what's going on with the business. And, you know, I'm frankly being realistic about the newspaper business.
Oh, what does that mean?
My paper, I will be the last person, I tell people this all the time, okay? As the business shrinks, I think it's good to be able to amplify your voice. And I still have what I think is the best job in newspapers, you know? Yeah. And I tell people all the time, if the lights have to be turned off, I'll be the guy turning them off, okay? But it just seemed like this was a good way to, it just seems to fit in with everything else I'm doing without taking hold of my life the way it was in the 90s when I tried to do a show the first time.
And it's going to be available in podcast form, right?
I am assuming, Bill, they sent me a thing today about ins and outs of breaks and the quarter hour and this and that. Mm. And I sent the program director an email early this morning. I said, you might as well have sent this to me in Spanish. You know, you could have given me the Esperanto edition, just as long as the producer knows when I start talking and stop talking. Yeah, I think there'll be podcasts. I think I think at some point it'll probably be up and running on satellite radio as well. And
good.
I'm going to give it a year, and if it seems like I got a great crew. I've been able to hijack Michael Kay's whole crew from his show that comes on after it.
Smart.
And I'll tell you this: the other day we're leaving the sports reporters, and Ryan and I had begun a conversation on the air about Derek Jeter that, as often happens, Bill, had spilled into the green room, okay?
Yeah.
And it was like every barroom fight we'd ever had, okay? And I had joked to Israel Gutierrez, who was on our show. I said, I'm going to do a radio show, and I really don't have a good answer why, Israel. And he listened to Ryan and I go back and forth for 15 more minutes on Derek Jeter, and he just tapped me on the shoulder and he said, that's why you're doing a radio show. So I guess there's stuff in my day that I still need to talk about this stuff. And so I think it's going to be fun.
So you're still happy with, you know, having a newspaper and having that specific word count every day? You never wanted to mess around with the internet and just say, oh, this could be 1,900 words. Screw it.
Well, I do write. I have dipped my toe into Simmonsville. I'm not answering questions anymore. But on Thursday on nydailynews.com, I do a web-only column that has generated some big traffic. And on that day, I will sometimes write as many as 1,500 words. I pretend that I'm Frank Rich writing in the Week in Review, and that has been, so that I kind of get the best of both worlds with that.
I didn't realize that was web only. It is.
Yeah, the Thursday column, we post it around like 9 o'clock your time in California, or sometimes a little earlier, like 8 o'clock. And I think of it as long, you know, a longer piece, and I let it rip, but it's all one thing, but it's been really fun.
Last thing, I told you this, but I'm going to say it again just because people are listening. Back in the 80s, after my parents got divorced, and I had moved to Connecticut because I lived with my mom, and I used to take the train back to see my dad every other weekend. I'd get the New York Post and the Daily News, and started reading your stuff, and obviously the one-liner column, the shooting from the lip.
Yeah.
My buddy Gus, who was 2 years older than me, he went to college, and we used to write these letters back and forth called the Lupica letters, which were a cross between your one-liner column and the Larry King, where he would just say insane things. Yeah. And that would be part of the art of the Lupica letters, which is how insane could we make these one-liners. And then when I got a column in college, it was called the Ramblings, and it was like a one-liner thing, and I took that to my first website and then ESPN, and now with Twitter, it's like it hurt the one-liner phenomenon.
Yes, without a doubt.
It's kind of like there's no reason to even do a column like that anymore. But you still feel like there's a place for it.
I do, and it's probably the most popular thing in our paper. And what's really truly amazing, listening to that story, is that the two of us never spoke until the other. It's amazing that we never intersected. But I'm a big fan of yours, and I have to tell you, much more importantly to the way that you've grown your own brand, Zach and Alex and Chris Lupica are huge fans. And when
good.
You've got the
Tom,
19, the 21, and the 23-year-olds, in your corner, you're doing okay.
Well, what I never knew is I thought you invented the one-liner column. And then I guess, what was it? It was Jimmy Cannon?
Jimmy Cannon.
But then it might have been somebody before him.
Well, but there was a guy who used to do it, and you're not so young that you were. George Frazier used to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Amazingly, and he used to call it one man's poison, ... in the Boston Globe. And he was a huge figure and a huge influence. And I actually knew him when I was working nights there, and he'd sometimes wait for me to get off work and go sit and drink with me and my buddies at Mary Ann's in Cleveland Circle.
He was the guy who created the phrase duende.
You bet. And I'm telling you, I quoted it the other day in a column about Willie Mays, and he used to do brilliant columns about who had it and who didn't.
And duende, was it duende or duend?
Well, there was even a question about that. I called it duende. He called it duende. And it was like, Mays had it, Aaron didn't. It was that kind of thing. It
was basically, for people who don't know, it was something that an athlete has that just, I guess it's like a compelling.
But not just athletes,
compellingness.
Yeah, not just athletes. I mean, it was. Yeah. He would say Fred Astaire had it, Gene Kelly didn't. Okay, it was this ephemeral thing of magic and charisma plus.
Pedro in 1999, 100% duende.
Yeah, Koufax had it. Okay,
Koufax,
yeah, and
Randy Johnson didn't really have it.
No, see, you're starting a Frazier column about it. This guy had it. This guy didn't have it. We could have fun making it. You ought to hijack it for Grantland.com.
Well, and I don't know if LeBron quite has it. He has like 60% of it.
No, he's not there yet.
I don't know what he's missing, but he doesn't. But Jordan had it, in spades. He was overflowing with duende.
No, yeah, it was spilling out of him.
Yeah, it's a good one. That would be a good back and forth thing. And so your last task is to get our friend Goldman to write for you. He's
Bill
like 90%
Goldman,
there.
I think we got him ready to go across. He said to me the other day, well, would it only be about, so if he's even asking this question, would it only be about movies? I said, Bill Simmons doesn't care. He just wants you to write for it. So I think we got him almost there.
It's him and Kornheiser are both so terrified to stare at that blank Microsoft Word document. And it's just, once you get out of that habit, they're so afraid to go back. But
Bill is a natural-born columnist, Bill Goldman is, for all the stuff he's done in movies and books and Princess Bride and blah, 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 and Butch Cassidy. And Tony Kornheiser is such a good writer, as my kids would say, it's stupid. And he ought to be writing somewhere.
I agree with you. Mike Lupica, your show, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, 1050 ESPN New York, hopefully available in podcast form. Check you out on New York Daily News and on the Sports Reporters on Sundays. Say hi to your sons. Thank you.
Hey, Bill, as Jimmy Breslin says, thanks for the use of the hall.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
So I get to sign off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at PodCenter at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.